want to tell you a little bit about this little baby right here who lived her whole life, her whole 79 years in Searcy County, Arkansas. She was that's Essie Treat. She was the 11th of 12 children born to Henry and Parthena Treat in the Searcy County community of Nubbin Hill. Don't you love that name, Nubbin Hill? And she grew up, said that her childhood, looking back on her childhood when she was in her older years, said the happiest times of my life were my childhood. This is Essie on the right with one of her sisters. When she was about that age, she was around 8 years old when she was given her first paying job as an artist. There was a feed dealer in Leslie, Arkansas, which is a town of some size close to where Essie lived. And this feed dealer, Jeff Griffin, said, "Essie, I'll pay you a dime if you'll draw a picture advertising my brand of chicken feed." He said, "Here's what I want you to draw. I want you to draw a great big strong rooster crowing saying, 'I eat Jeff Griffin's chicken feed.' And then next to that, I want you to draw a little old scrawny chicken, scrawny thing saying, 'I don't.'" And she did that, and she was paid 10 cents. So that was her first commercial work at the age of 8 years old. This is her sitting in the lap of her sister. When she was a young teenager, her school teacher at the Nubbin Hill, wanted her to draw a mural around the interior of the schoolhouse, a patriotic scene. This was about the time World War I was getting into gear. So Essie, from what I understand, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, stood on a chair that had maybe a kind of a scaffolding, stood on a chair of some sort, and at the age of probably 13 or 14, drew this patriotic scene. Well, there was this, speaking of World War I, there was this local fella that had gone off to fight in World War I. His name was Essie Ward. And the way Essie's oldest daughter, Dual, explained it to me, after the war, Essie was driving a wagon down the old dirt road, and Essie was walking home from school. And they met each other on this old dirt road and stopped and talked, introduced themselves to each other and talked a little bit, and then she crawled over the fence and went on home, and he took that wagon on home. And Essie, when she got home, told her parents, "I just met the man I'm going to marry." And they did. They got married in 1922. Essie Ward and Essie Treat. She was about 9 years younger than him. And they went on to raise 7 children: Ross, Dual, Jesse Jr., Geraldine, Bonnie Jean, who's here with us today, Maudie, and Joe Dale. And they had a pretty typical, I think, Ozark life, of that rural life of having a small farm and a big family. This is Essie with the oldest girl, Dual, and that is a girl, Dual's, that's the name. And you see, Essie's a big, strong woman. This will serve her well. She was raising all these kids and helping Jesse on the farm. She didn't have much time to be creative, in that she couldn't sit down and draw and paint. But she just built it into her life to be creative. For the children, she would make little paper dolls. She'd save pieces of cardboard and draw little horses, and save scraps of fabric to make little saddle blankets. So they had all kinds of little homemade toys. In 1934, they moved to this little home, a little 4-room home in the Hilltop community, and I guess that's where your mama lived the rest of her life until she moved to the nursing home. So this was home for the Wards. And during the Depression, Jesse, who is right here, you can kind of see that X, he worked for the CCC camp. He stayed gone for a week or two at a time. He didn't like being away from the family, but it was a way to get some cash money, some much-needed cash money for the family, and help feed those little mouths. So what that did, that left Essie at home with the kids and the farming chores. But again, being that big, strong woman, she was able to do that. And then she was called again to use her strength, both physical and inner strength. Jesse was diagnosed with diabetes, and that knocked him down pretty good. He wasn't able to do a lot of the physical work around the farm. because of his diabetes. So a lot of the physical work fell to Essie and the kids. And you can see here she is with some of her kinfolk. Well, so you see, she was up to this task of everyday farming. Now, the day-to-day life on the Ward farm revolved around keeping that family fed. They had a milk cow. They raised the usual vegetable crops of corn and beans and potatoes, turnips and cabbage. They also had an orchard of golden delicious in Arkansas black apples. They grew peaches, peanuts, grapes, peas, sorghum canes, soybeans, oats, and tobacco. They had a big farm, sold some of that as truck crops. And speaking of tobacco, Essie and Jessie both chewed tobacco. Essie dipped snuff, Garrett's snuff, in a little jar. And later on late in life, she switched from tobacco to chewing gum, I guess for the health purposes. She would do the plowing while she had babies that needed to be nursed. When it was time to nurse the baby, she would go take that plow to the end of the row, set it down. One of the older kids would bring the baby up to the field where she was plowing. She would go sit under one of the apple trees and nurse the baby. Give the baby back to one of the older kids and commence plowing again. Her oldest daughter, Dual, told me that she said, I got to where I knew when Mama was going to have a baby because she'd start gathering things up. She'd buy those little safety pins to pin their little diapers and things, and she would start gathering feed sack and just preparing everything. And she said, when the least child, the youngest child, Joe Dale, was born, that was the only baby that they had to call a doctor out for. And she had a hard time delivering Joe Dale. And that when, after Joe Dale was born, Essie told Jessie, now that's the last one we're having. That's it. Dual said, she got kind of loud with Daddy about that. But that was it. She was also a midwife herself. She delivered over 100 babies. People would come with their wagon and team and say, Ms. Ward, it's time. And she'd get in the wagon. If it was snowing, she'd wrap a quilt around herself and get in the wagon and go deliver babies. She was paid in a basket of turnips or a sack of cornmeal, whatever there was to trade for delivering those babies. The last baby she delivered, she had a hard time with it, and she had told her older daughter, Dual, I want you to go with me because I want to teach you how to do this. I'm going to learn you how to birth these babies. And they had a real hard time with it. It was a very frightening experience for Dual, but everything turned out all right. And when the baby finally was born, Essie said to her daughter, now bring me those scissors. I'm going to show you how to do this. Bring me the scissors and 2 pieces of string. And she tied off the umbilical cord, string, 2 strings, tied it tight, and showed her where to make the cut. Just like that. Made of strong stuff. Her strength Essie's strength was tested mightily in 1959 when she was diagnosed with cancer. And as she recalled, she said, the doctor set me down for 5 years, told me not to lift anything over 10 pounds. And this was a real problem for Essie because she'd never done anything but work her whole life. And now all of a sudden she just has to sit down. She didn't know what to do. Finally she came around to the idea of, well, maybe I'll paint. Maybe I'll paint. And she created this couple, Hezekiah and Miranda, or Mirandy. She's Hezekiah and Mirandy. This was the start of something big for her. Here's Miranda close up. And she said they were not specific people, Hezekiah and Miranda. They were kind of a conglomeration of people that she grew up knowing and a way of life that she grew up knowing. Now here's the old man, Hezekiah. And Essie said he wasn't patterned after anybody, but look at this picture from the Ward family album of Essie's daddy late in life. I think that's Hezekiah right there. She has him reading the newspaper because the lady that owned the newspaper in Marshall, Miss Tudor, suggested, why don't you paint that old man holding a newspaper? It'd be good for business. This is how she painted. She never used an easel. She sat on a footstool. The edge of the couch, the arm of the couch was her easel, if you will, or sit with that painting in her lap. She had here she's using a chair, but she had a TV tray. She would keep her oil paints there on a TV tray. She didn't use a palette. Put those paints on. She would dip her brush right into the tube and paint directly from the tube. She loved oil paints the best. She tried acrylic, but it dried too fast. And she said, I don't like watercolors because the flies eat that up as fast as I can slap it on. She started out using plywood, but the plywood warped, so she went to masonite, not canvas, masonite that you could buy at the lumber yard that she or some of the kids could cut into squares and use. And it looks like she's holding a pencil there. This is how she started. She would first shade the background, kind of do a wash over the masonite, maybe make a blue sky or a neutral background, and draw the scene with a pencil. Just almost like you would color in a coloring book. And now, so here's a partial scene, but I want you to look at how Hezekiah, in this case, he's holding a cane or something, but look at a finished version of this scene. See, he's not holding it. Every Essie Ward painting is original. She developed a series of about 55 different scenes of Hezekiah and Miranda. And someone might see this hanging in the bank down at Marshall, or maybe in the doctor's office over at Harrison, and somebody would see that and say, well, Ms. Ward, I like that one. Would you do that? And she'd just sit down and paint a new one. Pretty much the same scene, but she'd change it slightly. And she said, that away, in the art world, if you change it up a little bit, every one of them is original. Every one of her paintings had a little caption. Miranda, can't you beat that? They are gentle humor. Usually Hezekiah, poor Miranda's doing all the work, and Hezekiah is just kind of not, or he's in some kind of trouble. And you see what's happened. She is carrying the milk bucket, and she's tripped on the well bucket there, well rope. Every one of her paintings had a little trademark, and it's this right here. They look like rabbit ears. Essie Ward, in an interview, once said, it's my mark. That's all she ever called it, my mark. In one interview, I found her refer to them as my mark. See that mark that looks like rabbit ears? She never said they're rabbit ears. Her mark. And I point that out because we around here got to calling them rabbit ears for years, and then lo and behold, nobody in the Ward family ever called them, Essie never called them rabbit ears. But they look like rabbit ears or mule ears. Her mark. And she said, if that away, everybody will know that that is my painting because my mark is there. Sometimes she would save chewing gum wrappers, the silver inside of a chewing gum wrapper, and then she would put that in the window to give it reflection, make it look like it was real glass. And her daughter, Geraldine, said, you know, Mama drew, she painted from natural life. I love that. Painted from natural life. So what she knew, the scenes that she remembered in life, are what were the basis of these Hezekiah and Miranda paintings. So maybe this picture of Jessie in the old car led to this painting. Push, Mirandy. Maybe this picture of the Ward family hog butchering time led to this, chitlin time. These pictures are priceless ways to tell a story in a fun way of everyday life in the Ozarks, rural life in the Ozarks. Maybe this picture of going to church, and that's their car. Neither Essie or Jessie ever knew how to drive. As I understand it, they both tried to learn, and Essie ran through a fence and ended up in the ditch, and Jessie didn't do much better, and so neither one drove. But they bought the car so that kids and grandkids could haul them around places that they needed to go, which is a pretty good deal. Hurry up, Mirandy, we're going to miss the preaching. You see, she's holding her Bible just like Essie was holding her Bible. This is Ward Mountain, where the Ward family lives over there around in Searcy County, or Searcy County in general. This is some of the most beautiful country in the Ozarks you will ever be privileged to see. This is Ward Mountain. This is a view that Essie saw almost every day. And maybe the background, look at the background. This is one of her most popular paintings with our visitors. Climb that there sapling, Mirandy. See the little goat? The goat's chasing him. He's real chivalrous, isn't he? It's every person for himself. And this picture, again, is another scene near the Ward farm. This is when I was driving out there to visit some of the family one time. It's just beautiful. And maybe that pond and those mountains serve as this backdrop for the country doctor. She painted other subjects besides Hezekiah and Miranda. We saw the country doctor. This is a postcard of the Buffalo River, a scene on the Buffalo River, and all these splotches are paint. She was holding this postcard as she's sitting there painting, and here's the scene that came from it. Hezekiah and Miranda fishing on the buffalo. She painted scenes of life there in Searcy County. Is that Baker? Is there a Baker, Arkansas? Yeah. So it says tie yard, and I couldn't make that out. Baker, Arkansas. A tie yard, railroad ties at the train station at the rail yard. So that's a great scene of local historical interest. If a lot of people had an old home place, they had a photograph of it, Essie would paint it. She'd say, bring me a Kodak of it and I'll try to paint it. She called photographs Kodaks. Bring me a Kodak and I'll take a stab at it. So we've seen several family home places that have been painted by Essie. What she loved for her own personal pleasure was wildlife scenes, nature scenes, and scenes that had to do with Native American life. She called this one Yukon Monarchs. This is a very interesting one. It's kind of dimensional. This is pieces of bark, little pieces of bark, and so it's got texture to it. It's a painting as well as a kind of a collage entitled Skyline. This one, called The Storm, I was just reading an interview that a professor did with Essie in 1973, and he was asking her some really, to me, high-tone questions like art. I don't know what he was trying to get at, but he said, have you ever had a vision and then painted it? Have you ever had any kind of religious experience and then painted it? Or have you ever painted something and then looked at your painting and it's revealed, something is revealed to you? And she would just answer with these just common sense. And she said, well, one time this painting, The Storm, I got it. It's a black horse and a little white pony. And she said, I painted it 3 times. And the 3rd time, I painted a little cyclone in the back. And I didn't even realize I'd painted it until after the painting was done. So that was her answer to these kind of high. She loved the Native American scenes. Her grandmother was of Native American ancestry, so she felt a special kinship to the Indian themes. She also did some sculpture. And see, the body of the animal and the body of the Indian would be made of clay that she dug out of the pond there on the home place, not clay from Hobby Lobby or a craft store. But the legs would be made out of wood, and the tails made out of thread. So it was mixed media. Trails In. And she also painted Trails In. She said in this interview with the university professor that of all the paintings she did, the painting of Trails In was the one that she liked herself. She said, in fact, she said, that's kind of the only one that I really like, which is very interesting. You see, she's put one of her masonite easels in back of this sculpture for the photograph to make it stand out. She had 2 favorite presidents, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy. She loved John F. Kennedy. He came to Greers Ferry Dam to dedicate Greers Ferry Dam October 3rd, 1963. Remember when he was assassinated? And just several weeks later. But Essie, when she heard John F. Kennedy was going to be just in a stone's throw away, she said, get the car, we're going. I want to go see him, and I'm going to shake his hand. And she did. And then she painted this picture. Those are what if she had it up to her, that's the scene she would paint. But what sold were these Hezekiah and Miranda paintings. And being a businesswoman, because this had this painting had turned in, which she called her work, had turned into the main way of making a living for her and Jessie. So she went with the Hezekiah and Miranda paintings. That's what she spent most of her time doing. She never inflated her prices. Her paintings, I've seen them where she sold them anywhere from $8 to $20 a piece. She did sell 2 to the Smithsonian, she said, for $50 a piece. The only time her prices ever went up is if the price of her supplies went up. So these Hezekiah and Miranda scenes were what people really loved. And now she's way out in Searcy County. I mean, that's to me not that remote of an area, but to somebody from Chicago, that's out in the back of beyond. How on earth are people finding out about her? Well, this is in the early 70s by now, and it's this folk revival has been going on, folk music and crafts. And not too far from Essie lived this fella. Anybody know him? Jimmy Driftwood. Jimmy Driftwood, certainly Arkansas's best-known folk musician, and he was very influential in this folk era of folk revival about getting Arkansas in the radar of national folklorists and national events and things that were going on the East Coast. He had some Essie Ward paintings in his house, and he had people coming in his house all the time. I mean, big wig folklorists and record producers. So one of these fellas that came to visit Jimmy Drifter was this man, Ralph Rensler. I've just come to appreciate this man's life story. He was a major player in folk song revival in the 60s and 70s. He is, I guess, best known for his work with the Smithsonian. He was the founder of the Smithsonian's Festival of American Folklife, which is held each year on Capitol Mall. It's still being held today. He was a good folk musician in his own right. He's a mandolin player. He was a member of the Greenbrier Boys, which was the first bluegrass musical group that wasn't from the South, the first successful bluegrass group. What I really am in awe of him about, this is like that 7 degrees of separation. Bob Dylan's first paid gig was opening for Ralph Rensler's group. And they became friends. When Ralph Rensler and Bob Dylan met up years later, Rensler said, it'd been 25 years since I'd seen Bob Dylan, and he had his son there on a trip to Washington, D.C., and he came to see me. And Rensler said, Bob Dylan introduced me to his son, Jesse Dylan. Now, it wasn't Jacob. Jesse said, this is the man that got me my first paying gig. And Essie Ward's on a first-name basis with this guy. So he meets Jimmy Driftwood, first of all. He's at Jimmy Driftwood's house, and he sees these folk paintings on the wall. And he's not just collecting folk music. He's looking at all kinds of tradition bearers and craftspeople. And he looked at this painting on the wall, and he said, who did that? And Jimmy Driftwood said, oh, that's Ms. Ward. That's Essie Ward. And Jimmy Driftwood was very kind of protective of Essie. You know, he said one time some big hotshot record executive came to his house and made some remark about the primitive painting on the wall. And Jimmy Driftwood said, well, you call it what you want, but I think they're good. He thought primitive was some derogatory term. But anyway, so Jimmy Driftwood got Essie and Ralph Rensler hooked up, and Ralph Rensler immediately ordered 5 paintings, and their friendship blossomed from there. He continued to buy her paintings and help her market them in places, Louisiana, North Carolina, Connecticut, California. He was a key player in her kind of rise to fame. In 1970, he wrote to Essie and asked her if she would be part of the Festival of American Folklife. Each year they would highlight a different state or region, and in 1970 they highlighted Arkansas. So I want to read you just a little bit of Essie's acceptance letter to go to Washington, D.C. Dear Ralph, and oh, by the way, here is a photo of her there. So here is what Essie wrote in her acceptance letter. Dear Ralph, received your invitation to join the Folklore Festival, and I thank you so much. It came as quite a surprise to me. Since I've never painted on an easel, I will have to have a table or desk to draw and sketch my primitive paintings on. Would you please provide one for me or see that I can have one? Just a small one will do. My work has really gone over with a bang. I've got a $1,000 order from a man in Fort Lauderdale, Florida for my primitives. They've sold in France and Canada and every state in the Union. They've been shown in so many arts and crafts shows. They're on display now in Westport, Connecticut, so you can see they're getting around. Well, enough on that subject. I hope your leg is healed completely by now. I'm kind of anxious to see you so I can personally thank you for the help you've given me. I've missed seeing you down here at our arts and crafts shows. Well, I guess I'll finish off, so I hope to see you at the festival. Thanks a million, Ralph, and best regards to you always. Essie Ward, Route 1, Marshall, Arkansas. She's rubbing elbows with the guy that gave Bob Dylan a first paying gig. Jessie lived to see Essie rise to that level of fame, of getting to go to Washington, D.C., and receives this national recognition before he passed away in 1971. Later that summer, a woman named Jean Tucker, she split her time, she and her husband split her time between Norfolk, Arkansas, and Escondido, California. Jean Tucker contacted Essie Ward and said, I want to commission you to paint. I want one of every Hezekiah and Miranda scene. So that would have been about 40 paintings. And she said they worked out a payment plan and an agreement on how that was going to be done, and they sat down and made a list of all the paintings. And this was not an easy task for Essie because she had at one time a waiting list of over 100 people. So now here's a woman one person that wants 40, and she was very scrupulous in that I keep a list, and where you are on the waiting list, that's when your paintings will be done. She had a lot of work to do, and she would spend 4 or 5 hours a day on a painting. By this time, her arthritis, as she called it, was starting to be a little bit of a problem. But she was working hard at this, and she agreed to do this for Jean Tucker, and luckily we have some correspondence. They would write back and forth to each other, and Essie would tell her of the progress of the painting project. So I want to read you just a few excerpts from some of the correspondence to Jean Tucker from Essie. October 6th, 1971. Your paintings will be finished today. Please pick them up Friday or Saturday. I'm getting so many orders that I don't have room to hold them all. The price will be $64, $8 a piece. February 11th, 1972. Your paintings will be ready today or tomorrow. So she's making them in a kind of waves, batches. I have 7 finished and another one sketched. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to raise my price. I'm selling them now for $9 a piece. The paint is up so high and the brushes are just out of reason. If you don't want them at that price, just let me know and it will be okay. And Jean Tucker wrote and assured her that, yes, I do want the paintings at $9 a piece. April 4th, 1972, I went to Harrison today, and while I was gone, Jesse Jr., that's her son, sold 4 of the paintings I had done for you. Please give me until the 14th, which was only 10 days off, of this month to get your paintings replaced. The folks that Jesse sold them to lives all the way at Ann Arbor, Michigan. Now, I've hid the other paintings under the bed, so maybe I'll be able to keep those for you. April 18th, 1972. I'm sorry I had to borrow 6 of your paintings to take to the Art and Crafts Show at Mountain View, but I'll get them replaced this week if nothing happens. That show came a week earlier than I expected, and I didn't have time to get anything ready, so please forgive me. I'll get yours painted just as quick as I can. I've been sick, and I had to stay in the hospital 9 days, and I lost that much time from my work, so I just done the best I knew. Please give me until about the 27th this month so the paintings will have time to dry. I hope you won't think too hard of me. I will ship them to you and pay the postage if you wish. April 25th. Your paintings are all finished, and I'm going to put them under the bed so far I'll have to crawl on my belly to get them out. I don't feel too good. I guess I worry too much and am too lonely. June 8th, 1973. So a year has passed. Now the paintings are all pretty much done, at least that first order of 40. I've been awful sick, and I never got to paint for a couple of weeks. I went down with that arthritis of the spine, which almost paralyzed me for 3 days, but I'm better now. I have 5 of your paintings finished, and I will do the other one today. You will then have all the primitives until I get some more worked out. In other words, at that point she would have all 40 scenes until Essie created new scenes. I'm sorry I've had to raise my price to $10 a piece. The paint and brushes and material has just skyrocketed like everything else, so I just had to raise or quit. But I don't think I'm going to raise the price anymore because $10 is all they are worth. Now, June 2nd, this is the last letter, June 2nd, 1974. I aim to write to you all summer while you're in California, but people has just been ordering so many of my paintings. It's kept me busy till I just worked all the time. I've entered the contest to become Grandma Moses II, so wish me luck. My heart still gives me quite a bit of trouble. It gets out of time too much. We are having some of the coldest weather I ever saw. I nearly froze last night, so I hitched up an electric blanket tonight. Maybe that will help. I haven't had the chance to work out but just a few new pictures because so many people are ordering the old ones. It's kept me very busy just filling the orders. So here she was working hard, but it was getting harder all the time to do that work, and it was getting harder to live alone. Now her kids helped her out as much as they could. This is the strongest family you will ever be so privileged to meet, and that tradition carries on today in the closeness of the family. Her kids tried to help her out. Joe Dale told a story, the youngest boy, we bought Mama a new electric cook stove. And he said, I took that old wood cook stove out of the house. I took every bolt off of it. I piled the whole mess up in back of the barn. And when we come back to visit in a month or so, Mama was out in the back. She had put that stove back together and was cooking on it out behind the barn. She didn't want that electric cook stove. Well, I'm guessing it was in the late 1970s, Essie decided herself that she would move herself to the nursing home. Or she made the decision. She called up the kids and said, there's an opening down there at the home. Come help me get moved down there. She didn't wait for her kids to have to make that decision or her family to have to make that decision. Once she got in the nursing home, she quit painting. She stopped. A neighbor came to visit her and said, Ms. Ward, why don't you paint in here? That would help it pass the time. And she said, well, I can't paint in here because there's no windows in my room. See, she loved that natural light that came in that front window at the house was her muse. It inspired her, and that scene, that beautiful country scene looking out that front window inspired her. So once that was gone, she just couldn't paint anymore. Now, she had a good time at the nursing home. Her oldest daughter, Dewell, said, oh, Mama loved being in there with all them old people. She had a ball in there. So she spent the rest of her days in a nursing home. She died in 1981 at the age of 79. Late in her life, Essie Ward told an interviewer about her painting. She said, it's all I've ever wanted to do, yet I never studied anything about painting. I guess you could say I just paint it as I see it, actually or in my memory. Others like what I do. That's a real satisfaction. How many of us, I'm looking at us, the age of this audience, how many of us can now look back on our lives at this point and say our life's work has been or is a real satisfaction? That is a life well lived. And that is a life story well told. So we could stop right there. But the story doesn't end there. The story does not end there. You thought it was going to end because it's 5 till 1, but it doesn't end there yet. The same year Essie passed away, within a few months, this man comes into the picture. Ernie Dean, a well-known Arkansas journalist, historian, folklorist. He had a syndicated column called Ozarks Country that was well followed. People loved him. People that read the newspaper loved Ernie Dean's columns. He was contacted by Jean Tucker, the woman who had commissioned all those 40-plus paintings of Essie Ward. Jean Tucker said, we're going to move to California. I need to downsize. I want these paintings to stay in the Ozarks. I want them to stay as a collection. I don't want them to go to Memphis. I don't want them to go to Little Rock. I don't want them to go to Harbor Village. I want them to stay in the Ozarks. Mr. Dean, can you help me find a way? He said, let me make a phone call. He called here. He called the Shiloh Museum, talked to our then director, Bob Beeson, and said, y'all need these paintings. You need to get these paintings. So Bob agreed, and the negotiation started with Mrs. Tucker, with Jean Tucker. She had an asking price of $100 a painting, 40 paintings. So we needed to come up with $4,000. Now you can ask Carolyn Reno, our collections manager, how much money she has ever in her acquisitions budget, her budget to buy things. Not much. So the Board of Trustees had to have a fundraiser, had to raise the money. Our board at that time said, okay, we're going to set aside $1,000 of our own Board of Trustees money. We'll start the fundraising with this, $1,000. Ernie Dean pitched in by writing in his column. Because when Ernie Dean said something, people listened. People responded. And he said in one of his columns, let me just read you a little bit of what he wrote. Mrs. Tucker is anxious that this collection remain in the Ozarks as a memorial to the artist. Several of us have been working with her to try to assure that this will be accomplished. As readers of my articles over the years know, my feelings are rather strong that too much of the good from the past culture of the Ozarks and of Arkansas has been allowed to get away to distant points. And too often we Arkansasiers have been too quick to downgrade the work of our own artists and craftsmen while letting ourselves become persuaded that it's somehow inferior because it originated close to home. Well, I can do this. I can stand here today and do this program because the fundraiser was successful. Our board raised $4,000, bought the 40 paintings. It's the largest collection in any one place that we know of. Through the years, we've been able to acquire other paintings, such as this one. We bought 10 more from Jean Tucker's family after she passed away. Her children discovered that she had some more paintings, and we bought those. So we're up to 59 Essie Ward paintings as of right now, and still looking for more. And I'll tell you the one that I'd really love to see. She mentioned that she, in this interview with the university professor, that she had done a painting of the crucifixion. I would love to see that. So keep your eyes out. So a great satisfaction. Her life, well lived, a great satisfaction. And to be the caretaker of Essie Ward's artwork and to share her life story with you all and to preserve this story for the future for us here at the museum is such a great satisfaction. This podcast was produced by the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We welcome your comments. You can email us at Shiloh, that's SHILOH, at springdalear.gov. If you'd like more information about the museum in general, you can visit our website at shilohmuseum.org.